Omar Ramirez, welcome to Decor News Now. We're very happy to have you. Can you tell me a bit about yourself as an artist, as a Los Angelino?
I would say I'm a Chicano artist first and foremost, and that muralism was something that I started to learn when I was in college in the 90s and early 90s. I went to school between 90 and 95 at UC Irvine, and I was a student of Judith Baca there as an undergraduate and started working on murals and then started working with Spark and her after that. And then started doing murals after I got out of there, worked in the Los Angeles area doing murals and other work. But as I got older, I started to do other work like printmaking. I was at Suffolk Graphics for some time in the early 2000s, helping restructure that organization and at the same time learning the printmaking process as well. And then photography later on, drawing and working as a teaching artist in prisons and in at different spaces. I've worked at MALDEF. I work at MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. I would say that the work that I do and that I've involved myself in has been always to use art practices within that sort of historical use within Chicano communities and Chicano art, which has always been to address, repair, and restore agency, identity, to center what has historically been marginalized or erased because of systems that, historically disenfranchised communities of color, specifically Mexican American, Chicano, Chicana, Chicanx.
So this most recent project in the mural in Boyle Heights that you've worked with Ben Stapleton on, how did you engage with the community when you were planning that? And were there any sort of specific strategies or approaches you used to ensure the community's input and involvement?
Absolutely. So I would say that part of the process of making murals in our community has always been to have these parameters that take into consideration the history and the context of the site, right? As well as community engagement and community collaboration. And so working with different communities, let's say with like the U.S. Green Building Council, working with the Boyle Heights community and local artists and youth, it was to create an environment where there was already some conceptualizing happening before getting into the nuts and bolts of defining what the mural was going to be about. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of this was going to revolve around site, context, and community engagement in order to bring in folks that were, rather than me being the lead in this, my role was to facilitate workshops, facilitate a team. So I brought in young artists. We brought in youth to participate in this project, as well as experts in the field. So U.S. Green Building Council with their expertise in clean energy. We brought them in. And so our teaching artists from the space, from the Mural Workforce Academy, brought in folks in the community that were already working with climate justice or environmental justice through localized efforts.
This is, and as someone who's lived in East LA nearly your entire life, how have you seen East LA change?
It's constantly changing. I would say that historically, the east side of Los Angeles, for one, within the context of climate justice or environmental justice, we do see how divestment in infrastructure historically has impacted us, as well as redlining has impacted our community, along with eminent domain clauses or building, let's say, housing, also pushed us out of neighborhoods that we used to grow up in.
You work with a lot of youth artists today. Do they share similar stories?
I think that what they share a lot of is the impact of gentrification. So the terminology kind of changes and shifts, where we do see families who have been highly impacted by modernization or gentrification issues, these sort of issues around high rent costs. So they see themselves in that. And so when I talk to some youth and different youth that we work with, especially youth artists, they do talk about how they personally have been impacted by movement and displacement through gentrification. So I think that there is a connection between this generation and then, let's say, my generation from the the Gen X generation, and then even my parents' generation.
When it comes to this new generation of artists that you work with through the Boyle Heights Arts Conservatory, do you see any sort of new aesthetic themes?
Not a difference. I think that the approaches and the I guess the foundation is always going to be similar in the sense that we're always wanting to address some type of issue that is happening or harm that we have experienced. And so then we would, the issue that artists, especially in cultural practices like muralism, Chicano murals or Chicano muralism, they're deeply rooted in these sort of Chicana feminist frameworks, where art is not just to make something aesthetic, but it's also grounded and rooted in addressing and repairing, let's say, harms or sharing exposures of, like, let's say, issues that we have, or even sharing aspirations, as sharing, dreams, sharing feelings about the work. And so I feel that those things are still sort of the ground layer of the work that we do. The unfortunate reality is that it's not being connected back into education. So the fact that a lot of our youth, and even in my generation, I think that's like going from the 80s to now, the arts-based education and engagement in schools has diminished greatly over the years. And so a lot of youth don't have the exposure to the different technical practices and understanding of, like, language and terminology in the arts. And it's also interconnected with different fields within the arts, right? So when you think about visual arts, it's connected to dance, it's connected to storytelling, it's connected to visuals, it's connected to music. And so outside of a context, let's say, of the art world that we have usually in the Western art practices, it's very separate, right? And so I think when we look at the African diaspora, we look at indigenous practices, we look at these types of works, that there's a different approach to them. And so by reintroducing these practices along with Western art practices, we're starting to see how these things can actually take shape in young folks, right? And how they can impact them in their decision-making in art.
That's certainly the way that I view design. It's an industry about bridging that gap so that art isn't seen as something separate from everything else, or from science. And building is maybe the most obvious example of that. Do you have a favorite project, or a project that you feel was just incredibly impactful?
I think the project that we're working on this summer, that we're starting right now with the Parks and Recs for the county, I'm very excited about, because it's actually introducing these basic artist techniques into the camps as teaching tools. So we're painting murals about color theory, about
Cool.
perspective, about composition in different spaces, so that when young folks and families go there, and let's say there's already a mural that exists in that space, they're be able to go back and deconstruct how someone makes a mural, to look at, this is perspective drawing, this is composition layout, this is color theory, and look at how it's actually being put together in a piece of art. And so I'm very excited about how our work collectively at the Mural Workforce Academy is actually now using mural making as also as a teaching tool.
That's really cool. It sounds like a treasure hunt.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. It's our first this month. We're actually already meeting and talking about the designs, and so each park will have a different approach, and hopefully the goal is to actually make them return, so we could return to each park. So if we're at, let's say, Salazar Park in East LA, we might start with perspective drawings in the gym, and then once those are complete, we can go outside and do color theory. And so each park will actually have all these together. So we're really looking at it as a way to, like, teach narrative art, composition, subjectivity, design or composition elements, as well as perspective and scale. We're doing the job of what should be happening in schools, that it's not happening. So we want to be able to circumvent that and be like, okay, here we are in this space where you're going to play basketball, or you're going to play outside or hang out with your family, or even senior citizens that are at the Senior Citizen Center, right at the park. They can come in and support, help paint, and have that experience, as well as then reconnect, because not everybody has that experience at whatever age they are, of actually participating in self-care through the arts.
To bring it back to the environmental mural, Can you tell me about how that was conceptualized, how you plan a mural like that, what goes on it, what gets, you know, left on the cutting room floor, and where and when can we see it?
A project that we're talking about right now is the what 11 Vargas, who was the lead facilitator or designer for this as a teaching artist, you know, she titled it Interconnected Relations, or Relationships, I should say. And the idea was to first came up at a meeting with Climate Resolve, where I was present, and they asked for a pitch. What would you guys like to do as an organization or as a community? And so I was like, well, what if we do a mural on climate justice? And so that's how it started. And then it was researching, well, how does paint interact with murals? So usually murals in LA are done either with aerosol or with acrylic. And one of the gentlemen from Climate Resolve, Chase, he actually suggested researching paint that engages the environment in positive ways. One that may clean a space from smog, or the air from smog, or the wall from smog, or may reduce heat. And so we started researching, he and I started going through this process of vetting different organizations or different companies around this. And so we landed on this one German company that actually talks about how their paint can actually reduce the heat index of a building when on large scale. The indoors, it can actually decrease the like bacteria and viruses in that region, and etc. So we were like, this is really exciting to do a mural on climate justice that actually impacts the climate in a positive way. The major part of what we as a group, when we met with the youth, with the teaching artists, after we heard from experts in the field from different areas, from U.S. Green Building Council and community members who had gardens, one of the things that we realized was it's not just about making and engineering machines for clean energy. Mm-hmm. That is part of the solution. So having, you know, solar panels is great. Having wind turbines are great, and it's part of the solution to wean ourselves off of, let's say, toxic usage of engineering, right? But it's also, what are the cultural practices that are embedded already in our communities that we can highlight and center and look toward for solutions. The goal is actually, I don't know if Ben or anybody has told you, but it's because it's part of the Resiliency Hub initiative in California, that as more resiliency hubs open up in, let's say, the Los Angeles region, it will be exhibited at that space, and then kickstart a whole project at those spaces so that they can create their own mural around climate justice and environmental justice and clean energy. So that, let's say, the next space may be Southeast LA. And so Southeast LA would get panels, and they would get paint, and they would actually create their own vision of what this looks like for their community. And then those 2 murals would then travel to the next site, and then 3 murals would go to the next site. And so it just will grow as it continues.
Do you have a message for ways that the design community, builders, architects, designers, manufacturers of furniture and fabric, can help get involved in projects like this and can be a little bit more mindful and community centric?
The message is that there is a framework out there that exists to ensure that there is a restoration and transformational practice that should be centered.
Thank you so much, Omar. I really appreciate you doing this. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Bye.